The Gilded Cage. Author ApollinaV. Pairing Hermione Granger and Severus Snape. Rating M. Read to you by FlunFromOrbit. Chapter 1. Fuck! For an intelligent witch who prided herself on not only a comprehensible vocabulary, but insisted on edifying conversation, fuck seemed to sum it up nicely. With a surprisingly throaty growl, Hermione tossed the offending paperwork into the cold fireplace, conjuring her signature blue flame and watching the headlines, Ministry passes new marriage law, darken, curl, and slowly turn to ash. It was a childish act at best, but quite satisfying. She needed time to think. The law was obscenely unfair, with gross provisions of muggle-borns given their obvious unsuitable nature, and sought nothing more than to turn every witch of age, regardless of blood status, into broodmares. In fact, only witches were required to find mates. If a wizard wished to remain unattached, he was not penalized, which effectively shifted the natural dynamic of courtships. Witches were forced to woo and fight over eligible wizards. All unions under the new regimen smacked of puritanical and medieval influences. Hermione was quite familiar with the antiquated concept of paterfamilias, the man of the house exerting control and dominance over every aspect of the human and family life. But in the letter of this law, it had become institutionalized. Certainly, she understood the so-called rationale behind the law. Centuries of inbreeding did have its unpleasant consequences. Not that her uterus should be responsible for cleaning up their messes. There were flip charts and graphs detailing the apocalyptic future of the wizarding world. Ministry's propaganda fueling stories of drooling, three-eyed, web-foot little darlings. But, however, Hermione knew this wasn't driving the law. If that were the case, they would have mandated something equally as barbaric as purebloods can only marry muggle-borns, or some other such nonsense. But they hadn't. Forcing witches to vie for wizards' attentions was one thing. Forcing fine, upstanding, moral, pure-blooded wizards to put up with the uncivilized, ill-mannered, dirty muggle-born tarts was quite another. It was simply a question of demographics. In the modern age, young witches were less apt to marry, and old wizards, as in the kind who wrote the law, were overwhelmingly single. Given that women of a certain age, those in the waning years of their fertility, were exempt, only young, supple witches with good birthing hips and perp nipples were forced. They might as well have added "no mingers allowed." She would never be subjected thusly. She refused to be another aimless house witch, slave to her husband's whims, whose only ambition was to be pregnant and stuck in the kitchen. As Hermione chewed the cuticles on her thumb, she considered her best options. The ministry would force her to conceive a minimum of 2 children, then heap on tax advantages, monetary incentives, and wonderful gifts and prizes for popping out more. She'd need an impotent husband, one that could easily cave to her, one that wouldn't be swayed by incentive. If she had to be stuck in a loveless marriage, at least she'd wear the pants. Ron sprung quickly to mind, but was just as quickly dismissed. Certainly she could walk all over that boy, but he'd actually won a litter of children running around the house and probably never lift a finger to help her get around the productivity clauses. No, the burrow was fun to visit, the chaos amusing to watch, but she had no interest in actually being stuck in the kind of hellhole for the rest of her life. Neville. He was a perfect embodiment of weak and compliant. Hermione was also painfully aware that he carried a torch for her since early on in her school days. She had never encouraged it, but her apparent lack of attention only served to fan the flames, not that he had had the balls to make the first move. At the moment, he had taken up with Hannah a bet, but Hermione was certain that if she confessed some hidden love for him, he'd throw the witch over for her. Hermione raised her eyes plaintively to the ceiling. Could she really bind herself to Neville? She had had no doubt that they could settle into a routine, that they could make home life bearable. But then visions of him fumbling and grunting atop her, with Trevor watching from the bedside, sprung forth. Hermione didn't even want to think about Neville in possession of a penis, much less an erection. No, definitely not. She needed to be smart about this. Surely she could outthink the ministry. Lord knows she'd done it enough times before. This was just like a good logic problem. And there it was. Her lips turned into a twisted little smile. Hermione had her answer. Snape.